Good evening. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We're really excited tonight to have as our guest Khaliah Barnes. She's the Associate Director from EPIC. She has quite the bio. In addition to providing comments for over 40 federal agencies, she has created the Student Privacy Bill of Rights. She is a graduate from Georgetown University Law Center and has a minor in political science. So she is one of the leading national experts on this issue around protecting our children's privacy. And Khaliah, if you can begin, just if I've missed anything in the bio that you want to touch on, and also telling us a little bit about EPIC.
Sure, certainly. So thank you so much to Angela and to Sherry for organizing and for everyone else for making the time to discuss this very important topic. So I represent the Electronic Privacy Information Center, and for short, that's EPIC. And EPIC is a public interest research center. We're located in Washington, D.C., and we were established in 1994 to focus public attention on emerging privacy and civil liberties issues and to protect privacy, freedom of expression, and democratic values in the information age. To this degree, we do a lot of comments, as Angela said, before federal agencies, encouraging agencies to safeguard privacy, including student privacy. We file complaints before federal agencies, including the Federal Trade Commission. I'll discuss one of those complaints later. We sue government agencies under the Freedom of Information Act, so we have the right to request certain records, and the records that we request typically have to do with government surveillance. We also file amicus briefs before the Supreme Court on emerging privacy issues. We testify in front of Congress. We maintain an extensive webpage at epic.org. One of the things we do not do, which is rare in Washington, is lobby. We are an independent educational research center, and we've been working in the student privacy space for quite some time now. Over the last several years, we have ramped up our practice to include lawsuits, complaints, comments to the Student Privacy Bill of Rights, as well as testifying in front of state legislatures on the need to safeguard student privacy.
Khaliah, do you have a lobbying partner?
Nope, we're entirely independent. We don't have a lobbying partner, and that's unique for us because it gives us the freedom to make the statements that need to be stated. We don't get any corporate sponsorship, so no companies were funded. It's fundraising, it's foundations, it's attorney's fees. So if we win our lawsuits against the government, and this routinely happens, we do that. But keeping that notion where we don't lobby and we don't take corporate sponsorships allows us to be independent and tackle the issues that need to be tackled. But we don't have lobbying partners either.
Okay. Is there an organization that is lobbying on behalf of privacy and protecting children?
There are several other groups that are in the field now. I'm not exactly sure like what their lobbying status is, but you have other groups like the Data Quality Campaign. You have the Center for Digital Democracy. They fight a lot for children's rights. There is the Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT. But one of the other groups, a big research group, is out at Fordham Law School. This is the Center for Law Information Policy, and this is spearheaded by Professor Joel Reidenberg. I'm sure you're familiar with him, as well as Cameron Russell. And they have issued landmark studies on student privacy. So in 2009, they came out with a study to discuss longitudinal databases and the student tracking involved there, the privacy and security implications. 2 years ago, they came out with a report on cloud computing in K-12 schools, kind of giving a lay of the land about what's happening with all of the cloud computing in schools. So I think that would also be a very good resource when you have parents who want to know more about student privacy. In addition to EPIC, I would say Fordham Clip.
Okay, terrific. Well, it really speaks to our organization, Uniting for Kids, and I'll just say a little bit about Uniting for Kids. We don't take corporate dollars either, and we're fully independent and entirely run by volunteers. So we've got a couple of our volunteers, our leads. I'll say Teresa Smith is joining us on the line from Douglas County. Kayla Kirkpatrick is joining us from Jefferson County, and her daughter Lily. We have Sherry Kiesecker, who's calling in from Fort Collins. Jenny Lynn has joined us by phone from Denver. And we also have Laura, who represents parents across America. So thank you all for joining us. I've got one other person on the phone, Rachel Cohen, who's also an attorney and caring for 4 darling little children. She's joining us from Boulder, Colorado. So thank you, ladies, for joining us. If I've missed someone, go ahead and introduce yourself.
This is Cynthia Boyd calling from Baltimore County, Maryland.
Thanks for joining us, Cynthia. Is there one more? Okay. Well,
hello?
Yes. Hi.
Noelle Green, sorry.
Hi, Noelle. Thank you for joining us.
So I just put it on mute, sorry.
Okay, well, that happens. I do appreciate everyone putting us on mute so we can get the best audio. And I'll just briefly tell you a little bit about how we structure this. I'll ask Khaliah about 4 or 5 questions, and then we'll save about 10 minutes at the end for questions from all of you. I think your introduction, Khaliah, in terms of this really being rather a new issue for parents to deal with, and the importance of them having the information and being educated so that they can carry the message to their both state legislators and local school boards, because it's a quickly emerging issue, and it's one where I think there's a lot of misconceptions and a lot of confusion. So I'm so grateful that you've joined us tonight, and I'll go ahead and start with the first question. Some listeners might not be familiar with student data privacy concerns. Can you give us general overview of what types of data are collected when a child's at school and online?
Sure, certainly, Angela. So what I'll try to do is almost track a student from the moment she wakes up to maybe right before bedtime. And the examples that I'm using are real-world examples that either K through 12 schools or universities have used. So this is kind of the level of student tracking that is at least publicly discussed. So some schools require fitness trackers, which monitor physical activity and sleep. So that can be really from the moment that your student wakes up, she may be wearing some type of fitness tracker. Some schools use location trackers that can detect when and whether a student has boarded the bus. Some trackers even provide the level of detail to where your student is within the school. Is she by the gym? Is she by the nurse's office? Your student can enter in the cafeteria. Some schools have used palm scanning, or to put it bluntly, palm vein readers. So this is a situation where instead of using cash or credit card or your school swiper, some schools have chosen to allow students to place their palms on a scanner, and that's connected to the student, and it says, oh, this is Khaliah's account, this is how much you have in your account. And there at one point, certain schools in Maryland wanted to use that, and there was a public backlash. However, other schools continue to do that. Now, when she enters into the actual classroom, it's another story. As we know, you see numerous online platforms and apps that collect and retain and further disclose her information. And it can be, what you may expect as name and address and grade level to more detailed information. It can include medical information. Depending upon the platform, it can include medical information. The platform may ask questions about parents or what's going on in the home. It can also be very commonly an email platform or other interactive platforms designed to measure aptitude or social engagement. those are just a handful of examples. And then, of course, at the end of the day, you have some schools who will give devices to the students to take home. Here, take this tablet home, take this laptop home. And there are questions that arise there, what the school can see. Many years ago, there was this scandal in Lower Marion County in Pennsylvania where students were given a laptop to take home, but what it was not disclosed that the laptop's webcam was on. So you had a situation where students were being recorded in their private, in their rooms, in the privacy of their homes. You also have companies who monitor what students are doing on social media. What are they tweeting about? And you can have remote proctoring services as well. So we see this more so with university. I haven't seen it particularly in K through 12, but sometimes it's a test to say if your student can't come, but you still want to have to take the test. Here's this remote proctoring service that you can download onto your laptop that records, whether you're looking at the screen, what's going on around you, how many times you look up, and issues like that. Now, the issue, I'll just briefly say, isn't the use of the technology, but rather the collection of the sensitive student data. Mm-hmm. And there's been this unfortunate conflation that says if we have technology in the classroom, that necessarily means that we have to collect all of this data on students. And that's just simply not true. So that's where a lot of these issues arise, that it's not simply allowing the student to interact with the technology, but rather subjecting the student to data collection and what we call over collection of sensitive student data.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So why should parents be concerned about data sharing and getting involved in the issue of protecting because what I can hear a lot of parents saying is, well, my kids are on their phone interacting with data collection devices all the time, inside and outside of the school. So why should it be of concern for them, particularly within the schoolroom walls?
Well, within the schoolroom walls, Angela, it raises important questions, broadly speaking, about what accountability, transparency, and oversight mechanisms are in place. It raises questions about for what purposes will the data be used, how long will the data be kept, to whom else will the school or the company disclose the data, are there less invasive ways for the student to interact with the technology? And to get to your question, what is the difference here is this gets to a broader question of that schools should be environments of free inquiry. Students should be able to have a level of intellectual freedom. But when every click or like or everything that a student types is recorded, there is a chance that may stifle that student's innovation. And so when the student steps into the classroom, he or she should be assured that the information will not be used for different purposes. You don't want to be graded for, say, maybe mistakes or issues that you have in 5th grade shouldn't follow you for the rest of your life. But the way in which there are now these extensive dossiers, electronic dossiers that are taking information from this company and what the student said on this social media platform and crossing it together with other information, it raises substantial privacy issues.
Thank you. I have a 16 and 18-year-old daughter, and we know that this is the stage of experimentation and exploration, and they don't reach full cognitive development until they're 25. Mm-hmm. And so I think from a parent standpoint, there's a great deal of concern about what conclusions and generalizations are being made as a result of the data that's collected. There's this new trend, and they call it personalized learning, which from a curriculum and education standpoint, it's quite frankly the opposite of personalized learning. But they're calling it personalized learning and blended learning. And can you talk a little bit about the hidden and protected algorithms that are behind that? Thank you.
Sure, absolutely, Angela. So these platforms are not only collecting the information which students insert directly into the platform or the teacher does, but also other information that the student may be unaware of, like how long she stays on a page, how many clicks did she make on a page before getting to the right answer. So the issue here with going to the algorithms is it's not only that the student or parent is unaware of that type of data collection. Oh, I didn't realize they were counting how long I stayed on the page, but the decision making behind the personalized learning is largely opaque, right? So companies don't disclose how they've arrived at the assessment that Jane should be, elevated to the next level of the platform, or that Jamal should have to stay back. That's not transparent, and then it becomes a due process issue, really, for the student, the ability for him or her to review and dispute the assessment. Previously you could say, I know that my grade is my attendance and these quizzes and this homework, but we're getting into these nebulous types of categories for how our students are scored. And so that's one of the issues that EPIC has focused on. We've called for what we describe as algorithmic transparency. So when we say that students should have access to their education records, it's not only what the schools or companies collect, but the decision-making behind that process.
Which is, that nebulous process makes it really hard for parents to kind of wrap their brain around, why is this such a critically important issue? So thank you for drawing attention to that. And what I'd like for parents to understand is what the benefit these companies are getting in terms of collecting all this data around their children, and why they are really fighting tooth and nail against any kind of privacy legislation that protects our students. What's their motive for collecting this data, and what's the bottom line benefit to them?
Well, while I may not be able to speak directly to a company's motives, what I can say is that when you don't have adequate privacy protections, the information can be used for non-educational purposes. So I can give you an example right now. So there's directory information under the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, or FERPA, one of the leading student privacy laws. There's some information that your student has out there that you as a parent or the student, depending upon her age, has to affirmatively opt out of, like her name, her address, honors and awards that she's received. Otherwise, this information can be given away. And it's oftentimes given away to marketers, and they will take student information and use it to sell dossier. They'll sell the student information. And our organization actually filed a complaint against a company because what the company said is that it was collecting student information for scholarship purposes. So it requested that the students give all types of information: political affiliation, health information, sexual orientation information, medical information. And the company said, if you give us this, we can make you aware of scholarships or schools that you should consider. What the company did not explain is that the information went to its business partner, which then sold that information. And so at the time of our complaint, there was a list. The business partner was selling a list of LGBT students. And also, it was collecting this information over an insecure connection. So the information, there was poor data security. So that's an example of when you don't have adequate protections and when you don't have enforcement, which is key, you have companies taking and using this information in ways it was never intended to be used for.
You talk about the enforcement issue, Khaliah, and can you just talk about the current laws and how they protect privacy and where they fall short?
Sure. So there would be, we'll talk about three main ones. So FERPA, which is what we just mentioned, and that's the main student privacy law, and that grants not only students the right to access and amend their records, but also importantly prohibits disclosures except for certain circumstances. Then you have COPPA. And COPPA protects the privacy of children under 13, and this relates to online websites that are geared towards children under 13. And this is about the collection and use of their personal information, that companies have to get affirmative consent from the parents, and that the parents can revoke the consent. And then you also have the Protection of Pupil Rights Amendment, PPRA. This concerns surveys. So you have 3 laws that are routinely relied upon, FERPA being the main one. And one of the biggest issues, at least that we're seeing with FERPA, is the lack of enforcement. Now, the way that FERPA works is if a school violates FERPA, discloses the records when it didn't have the authorization to, it didn't fit under an exemption, then the education department has to allow the school to voluntarily comply. If the school does not, then the education department can remove funding. We submitted an open government request to see whether the education department was actually investigating the complaints that it had received. Mm-hmm. And from the information that we saw is that the education department in certain situations failed to investigate potential FERPA violations. So for us, one of the key items here is enforcement. And that's why any of the state laws that are being passed, and even as Congress looks for student privacy initiatives, student privacy laws, the key will be enforcement.
And what do you think is the best form of enforcement for school districts?
So the best form of, so I guess you can look at it in a variety of ways. As regarding to the companies, we've espoused for a private right of action. So if you're a parent or a student of a parent, or parent of a student, and a company has disclosed your information or used it in a different way, we say you should be able to take them to court. When you're talking about school districts, meaningful enforcement would entail that district prohibiting that company from having access to student records for that purpose. And actually under FERPA, there's a provision that says, hey, if a third party, if a district discloses the information to a third party, the third party discloses information in violation of FERPA, then that third party shall be prohibited for 5 years from accessing that information. But we're simply not seeing that. We're not seeing school districts saying, hey, company X is data mining the information, so we're not going to give the student information to company X anymore.
Okay, and what's the best way for parents to find out which companies are in violation and have been, litigated against and had claims against them? How can we as parents find out which companies we can go then to our school districts and say, look, this company has violated FERPA, and so we want to make sure that they're prohibited from doing business in our district?
Sure, certainly. So in true lawyer fashion, I will pivot and say that the onus is, the parents want to be involved and should be involved. I agree. I would say the onus is on the school districts because they are in the best situation to know this information, because it's the school districts who are signing up for the services and who are approving the services. And so, one of the things that we've said is that when school districts go forth with these proposals, they should have public hearings where they say, these are the companies that we're considering. At the very least, they should publicize the companies to which they disclose information, the types of information that are being disclosed, as well as what happens behind the decision-making process. And that's where our Student Privacy Bill of Rights comes in. We've outlined this process. The end goal really would be for that to be codified into law. It's a wonderful practice for districts to follow, but the key is enforcement, and that's really through the law.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I'm looking at our clock right now, and I want to make some time for some of the guests that have joined us tonight. So if you, as parents, have questions for Khaliah, please feel free to ask those.
I'm going to jump right in. FERPA obviously has some loopholes with regards to educational research. I'm wondering if there's any suggestions with regards to forcing districts into transparency to parents with regards to when, where, what, and how, because obviously we don't necessarily know which of our vendors might be doing this, for what purposes, et cetera. And the FERPA loophole just seems huge and gaping.
Can you tell us your name before you ask?
This is Rachel Cohen in Boulder. I'm the other attorney in the group.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.
Sure, Rachel. I'm trying to think what would be the best way. I mean, one tool that individuals routinely use would be like an open government request. And this is something that EPIC has used in our advocacy toolbox when we wanted to find out what types of, I mean, when we did it with the Education Department, it was about FERPA complaints, but we also submitted an open government request. This is on the federal level concerning private debt collection and student records. What we were really trying to see is whether third parties who gained access to students' information were upholding their duties under the Privacy Act. And so many advocates can use and have used this as a tool to say if they want this information, and if a district has not disclosed it or made it readily available after a simple request, and sometimes we've seen advocates go and say, okay, I'm actually going to submit a formal state open records law request.
Hello.
But I agree that districts have to be more transparent with who they're handing over the students' information to.
Rachel, thank you for your questions, dear. I can't see which number are you. Are you 5? I'm going to go ahead and mute. Are you 5805?
Yes, sorry, I had a child in the background.
I heard that. Thanks for your question, Rachel. I know this is a moving target, and I think, in terms of kind of bringing transparency to what's happening is the first step, and shining the light on where the violations are happening are going to be that first step. So let's go ahead and get another question.
This is Sherry Kieskaker. I'm wondering if I could ask a quick question.
Sure, Sherry, go right ahead.
Thank you so much, Professor Barnes, for joining us. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the SLDS and the data that is shared between each state SLDS, and if that's PII, do we know if that's shared with the federal government?
Thank you for your question. So I guess the second part of your question. So that information, from as far as my understanding of it, that is not shared with the federal government. The information, the personally identifiable information from SLDS. That's one of the issues. So it's not as if that information is then just given up to the Education Department. But to your other question, there was a good report. It's been a little while now. This was in 2009, and this is a Fordham Clip report, and it discussed some of the issues with SLDS, some of the data transfers, as well as the lack of security safeguards. So the Fordham Clip did this study on the SLDSs and found that in many instances they had poor access controls, or individuals who couldn't have had access for so many years were able to access that information. So I wish I had more to give you there. But to answer your second question, no, it's not disclosed to the federal government. And I think it would be worth checking out that 2009 with understanding that it's from 2009, because that can also provide additional background on what Ford and Clip found with privacy and security.
Thank you.
Khaliah, I think there's a lot of confusion around PII and personal information. So can you help parents understand that distinction just briefly?
Sure. So do you mean as it relates to education records, or just general, or like from a policy standpoint, what's the best way to?
Yeah, because what we hear PII, and as parents, we're like, what does that mean, and why is that more important, and how is that considered in the equation of where do we go in terms of policy protections?
Okay, certainly. So, and this is interesting because it depends upon which regulations you're looking at. But broadly speaking, personally identifiable information would be any information that you could use to uniquely identify a person. So it can be a name, would be one example of PII, but then you can also use something like an email address. You could also use something like a phone number. But if you look at, for example, the COPPA regulations, they will use an IP address will be included in PII. When you're looking from a policy standpoint, you want the broadest definition possible. So this would also include information that combined would reveal the unique identity of a person. So if you say, I didn't use the student's name or the student's ID number, but I described it as the only male who's in the class, who's 6'4", who wears a green shirt, and we all know that's John Smith, that would be information that combined would identify a particular student. So from a policy standpoint, the best definitions are broad. It's fine to outline specific items, but then you get the catch-all that says, information by itself or combined with others could be used to uniquely identify a student.
Mm-hmm. I want to take one more question. I'll save my comment for the end, but I just got a statement from one of my credit card companies regarding privacy. Are there any other questions?
This is Sherry again. If I can ask one more question.
Sure, please do, Sherry. You're our resident policy expert here in Colorado, privacy expert. So you go right ahead, dear.
Expert, but definitely concerned. I do have a question as far as something that's up and coming. In Colorado, we have 2 pilot projects on workforce data badges that are happening. And I'm wondering, Professor Barnes, if you're familiar with data badges and the let parents know what that is, because it's uploading evidence to the internet, to the cloud, and just kind of briefly touch on why we should be concerned about that.
Sure, certainly. So, although I'm not familiar with this particular proposal, I am familiar with data badges in certain contexts. It's this idea, I've seen it in certain contexts, this idea that, the student can take everything that she or he has done and it kind of just translates and it's uploaded, as you said, into the cloud. And we were talking about this, and it's important, I think, for parents to remember and for districts to remember, for anyone to remember, when we're talking about uploading any information to the cloud, substitute the cloud for someone else's computer. You're putting your information on someone else's computer. So they're having the care and the custody, and you're trusting their security safeguards. You're trusting that they have technical, administrative, and physical access to that. And so some of the issues that arise is when you're uploading such sensitive information, not only, does the information, there can be a data breach, and then the question happens, what happens when this information is out, but also that there's a threat that this information can be used for other purposes. So when any state is going through a proposal to take such information and upload it and transfer it. The question is this actually necessary? I think oftentimes there will be proposals that say, you know, oh, we have this great idea and we've got the technology to do it, but sometimes there needs to be the question to say, is this what we actually need to do? What is the problem that we're trying to solve, and is there a less invasive way? Because in many instances, the cost is very high for students if this information at all is compromised.
Sherry, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it actually does. I think the point that I'm more concerned about, which Professor Barnes hit on, is once that information is uploaded, it can be used for practices that maybe you weren't meaning for it to be used as. If a student uploads a video of themselves, you know, being competent as a leader, yet somehow a data broker or someone else gets a hold of that video, can use algorithms to depict, you know, based on their gender, their ethnicity, their age, or you can tell socioeconomic status, or use an algorithm to detect anything from ADHD to personality. That child won't know that decisions are being made about him or her based on this algorithm that someone is using.
Exactly. That's one of the key points in the profiling that you alluded to. What would happen, and these are some of the issues that districts have to confront. And these are important questions for parents to raise if no one else is raising them.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say from an educator standpoint, one of the things that I'm hearing a lot is that, you know, educators need that data. Educators need that data. Well, I do need information, but I don't need a third-party broker to gather the information. The information that I'm gathering with my students in the classroom is the most important information. And I certainly, you know, we're right now in this age of accountability where educators are being micromanaged, and literally their curriculum, their entire curriculum is scripted. And so our ability to literally meet the needs of the individual child has been completely undermined. And a lot of it has been forwarded by the argument that, you know, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. And that's such a misconception. I mean, there are all kinds of things that we can't measure and we can still improve. And unfortunately, in today's information age and with this trend in technology, all of education has become about measurement, and we've really lost sight of the purpose of education. And it's not, you know, there's a crisis in conscience in today's education system, because it used to be that we would open up our doors and say, come inside, you know, we're here for you. And the purpose of this education is to benefit you. And today in this data mining culture, what we've done is thrown open the doors and say, come in, you've got something that we want. And it's being traded and it's being shared, and there's, you know, transfers and conclusions and assumptions made not just about those children, but about those teachers and about those schools. And data has become very destructive to a lot of what is the design for education. And I mean, it's challenging because there are benefits to it, but I just see in the current direction of how we manage schools and manage children that the data is really being used as a hammer. And it's frightening. And I have two daughters, they're 16 and 18, and I just testified at the Colorado State Legislature on the privacy bill. And one of my comments was, I feel like, you know, somebody's pulled up a chair outside my daughter's bedroom window and is out there gathering the information. And I don't know what information is being gathered and where it's being shared. And I'm particularly concerned that information is being gathered on our children. We have all of this trend around P20 alignment, and you know, how we have to have from preschool all the way through college our children aligned. And what we seem to forget is that these are children in the tender stages of development.
Yes.
That they're on their way to becoming. But there is no data set that's going to tell us who that child is. And if there's a claim that there is, then that should not be trusted. So I want to give you the last words, Khaliah. Is there anything that you want to share with parents, with educators, with students that will help us be more equipped in terms of challenging the injustice around data sharing and data mining?
Well, it's really on your point, Angela, which reminded me, one of the things that we are hoping for, that we've called for, are more privacy-enhancing technologies, privacy-enhancing techniques. And these minimize or eliminate the need to collect personally identifiable information. And this gets to your point because it allows the school to say, I need to have data on what level a fifth grader should be, what type of books a fifth grader should be able to read without knowing the specific fifth grader. So it's this idea that students should be able to go in the classroom, use the online platforms without it collecting all of his or her personal information. So now it's a benefit to the student, it's a benefit to the district. The district knows what's a better way to teach, what's a stronger way to teach. It helps the teachers say, oh, you know what, maybe this platform can reach the students who are on this level, this platform can reach students on this level without having to sacrifice the privacy. So it is really on your point that you should be able to use the technology without turning over that information. It should be beneficial to the students. The students should be able to study the technology instead of the technology studying the students, which is where we are today. And that's really your point. So I thank you for the time and the attention and for your work on this.
Well, we are so incredibly grateful to you. And you have, brought attention to this issue, but also your work both in the policy arena and with these various government agencies, but also, going after them and filing charges and seeing that played out in the court is really beneficial. So thank you so much for your time this evening and for enlightening us on this important issue. And if there's anything that we can do to support EPIC in the future, and you, please let us know, and we hope to continue the partnership.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you. And thank you all of our guests for joining us. I'm going to stop the recording. If you'll hang on for just 1 minute, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.